I'm Patrick Cordingley. I retired from the army in 2000. We lived in London for 2 years before coming to settle here, sort of 8 miles outside Salisbury, but actually more importantly, 7 or 8 miles from Romsey. I think initially I felt I was more attached to Salisbury because I was born there in 1944. But a lot of things have transpired recently which has made us become more attached to Romsey. For instance, Melissa, my wife, and I were joint presidents of the Romsey show this year. The reason for that is because the theme was the First World War and they were looking for some military person rather than somebody who had been born and bred on a tractor. The involvement with the Romsey Warhorse project came about really because I got to know Sarah Saunders Davis, one of the movers and shakers behind the fundraising. And she had actually asked me to do a number of lectures before raising money for local churches and schools as well. And she came to me and said, would I be patron of the Romsey Warhorse Memorial Project? And I was deeply flattered. I mean, I was rather embarrassed too. You always think of patron being somebody particularly special, and I was actually nobody, just a retired army officer. But I suppose the fact that this had something to do, well, a lot to do with the military, it did make a lot of sense. And curiously too, I felt at the time that if I was going to be patron, this would not actually involve me with any work at all. I would just see what was happening and ask to go along and look at something and perhaps even be present when the project was actually unveiled. The truth is completely different. I went along to the first meeting, some time ago now, just to literally introduce myself to the other committee members, Dorothy Baverstock being the chairman, and I suddenly realised that actually it would be fun to help try and raise the money that was necessary. We thought initially that it was a sum of some £60,000, and by the time I'd come to the first meeting, Amy, the wonderful sculptor, had been selected, and her maquette, I think at this stage, had already been produced. And I suddenly realised, as I said, that it would be tremendous fun to get involved in fundraising and to try and understand how important this project was to Romsey. And as I say, I was getting closer to Romsey than I was to Salisbury. And initially, I had a bit of time to help with the fundraising. Subsequently, I haven't been too much help, but I'm just about to re-energise myself, although the money as I speak now for the actual sculpture has been raised. We just need money for the plinth, and then there's the argument about who's going to pay for the front of the park being restored. But I just got so excited by the project, and the more I read about the Remount Centre and what it meant to Romsey, the more intrigued I became about what we were trying to produce here. Was it just a statue to commemorate the fact that Romsey was a remount centre in the First World War, and a very important remount centre as well, one of the biggest of them, producing some 120,000 horses to be slaughtered in Belgium and France, sadly. But they were extremely well treated, extremely well trained while they were here. It was obviously a very high-grade setup. Was it just that we were commemorating that, or was it that we were doing something wider? And I think it was my involvement in the Romsey show which made me realise that actually Romsey had got this connection with 1914, this huge remount centre with the vast number of soldiers who were actually working there, outnumbering probably the villagers, well, I suppose townspeople, but Romsey was not big at the time. And it must have been incredibly important and also, I suppose, quite oppressive too, having the remount centre right on top of Romsey. But looking at the Memorial Park and reading all about Jack Seeley and Warrior and how he'd come to open it in 1922 and how that was made from the rubble of the Remount Centre, one began to realise that actually we were commemorating an awful lot of things here by putting this statue up. And then again, when we looked at the First World War for the Romsey show and realised that 370 odd people, men from Romsey, being killed in the First World War, suddenly began to realise that actually we were reinvigorating, if you like, the Memorial Park by putting this statue up there. We are creating something which was going to be very special for the people of Romsey. We were putting up a statue which is not only a commemorative statue, it was a remembrance of commemorating and remembering the people who had served and given their lives in the Great War who came from Romsey. It was also historical. It was where children hopefully would come and be taught all about what happened and why the horse is there and why the soldier is wounded, and showing that the bond between horse and soldier. And it is so much more, and the more we go on discussing, the more beautiful we look at this lovely maquette, and now the statue has actually been made, realise how very special it all is. And I think, really, finally, I just say that I'm deeply moved by the whole business, and come July the 3rd, the date when we hope to have the unveiling, I hope Romsey will be en fete, because it's going to be a deeply moving, a deeply impressive ceremony to unveil this extraordinary statue which Amy has sculpted for us. And as I say, I'm impressed, so impressed by the committee and all they've done, and the energy that they've put into raising the money and overcoming inevitably some of the local discussions by councillors making the occasional boring comment about where it should be or where it shouldn't be or how high it should be, overcoming all these problems and actually producing something very important, very special for Romsey and for the history of Romsey. Well, there we go.